I speak as one of a team of researchers involved in a project called Traces of Nitrate, which you can find on our faculty website. Traces of Nitrate explores the histories and legacies of British investment in Chilean nitrate mines and British involvement in its global trafficking. And I'm the art and design historian that works with two photographers. So there's two photographers as part of the three-person team. And the project importantly undertakes new photographic documentation, which Ignacio will show you at the end of my paper, which will be about 20 minutes, of geographically disparate but historically connected landscapes. And the project looks at whether it's possible, I suppose, to photograph a legacy of an industry that spans the 19th into the 21st century. Okay. The nitrate of the Atacama Desert, and this is a Google map, the Atacama Desert is northern Chile. If you don't know, you may not know. It's this desert region here. The nitrate of the Atacama Desert is sodium nitrate. It's a salt bonded with caliche ore that's white in colour and soluble in water. And once purified, it becomes can become a powerful fertiliser and explosive. There are records of its processing, both as fertiliser and explosive in Peru through the Spanish colonial period. It was dissolved in tanks called fondos, inverted cones that were filled with caliche that was boiled to separate nitrate as a liquid that was then run off to dry or to crystallise, leaving a residue of mud and salt that was then called ripio. Most of my paper now is related in some ways to Lindsay because it's an assertion of history against concealment of the market. So you have to kind of relax and listen to some historical details that you may not be familiar with. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what constitutes a nitrate landscape. So the nitrate industry, although nitrate's in the desert and has been developed as a small-scale industrial pursuit, but nitrate industry was a development of European and particularly British capital. Merchant houses with commercial and financial interests in Latin America, such as Anthony Gibbs. Gibbs was the head of the Bank of England towards the end of the 19th century. They'd established themselves in Chile through the export of guano, which they used those profits to buy and to capitalise sites in Antofagasta region initially, and then extract nitrate for export, that is, to mine on an industrial scale. They built chemical processing plants with attendant machine tool workshops, factories in the field, so to speak. And here is a 19th century map, which you can't see very clearly, but the red dots, are all nitrate officinas, nitrate works that follow the line of a railway. So there's an industrialisation process. Chemical processing plants, machine tool workshops, railways and workers' housing. So many officinas became self-contained industrial communities. The exploitation of the desert rapidly escalated from 1875 during the War of the Pacific, and the war settled a border dispute between Bolivia, Peru and Chile. Territorial claims of those three countries were bound up with national rights in the mineral wealth of the land and in its plentiful deposits of nitrates. André Gundefrank, a Latin American economic, calls the deposits of nitrates succulent. And there is also the row becomes around the authority to impose taxation on exported nitrate. So the trigger or the excuse for war was the taxation by Peru of a Chilean and British-funded company, a Gibbs part-funded company, that became the initial trigger. Chile won and was victorious over Peru, so it increased, and Bolivian forces. So Bolivia was denied access to the sea, and Chile extended itself north to increase its landmass by about a third, and that third included very nitrate-rich deposits in the desert, the region called Tarapacá. The desert then was sold. Chilean victory in the War of the Pacific affected a denationalisation of the Peruvian nitrate fields. The Chilean government, under some pressure from London bankers, allowed capitalist speculators who'd bought up war-devalued certificates for the right to mine. And for example, English capitalist John Thomas North became known as the Nitrate King, and he and his partner Robert Harvey bought mines in exactly this way. So they bought devalued certificates to mine and mined them, and those certificates increased in value. Robert Harvey could be called an insider trader. He was inspector of mines for Peru and then for Chile, so he knew exactly how much nitrate and how valuable it would be in the end. So the history of British trade in Chilean nitrates could actually be told as competition, in a way, between John Thomas North and Anthony Gibbs. So each of these interesting and big and avaricious British capitalists encroached on each other's profits through manoeuvres to control and counter-control the trafficking of nitrate. But they also both pursued business practices of speculation. Gibbs, you could argue, is a long-term player, while North had a very short-term affair with nitrates, but he was the much more determined and conspiratorial monopolist. Their different forms of capital accumulation left similar and different traces, which I will show you later in this paper. Now, styles of speculation didn't actually alter the structure of nitrate trading, which spanned the Atacama Desert. So speculators purchased nitrate fields. So it's an expanse of the desert where caliche, the rock-containing nitrate, was found in sufficient quantity. And companies dominated by London merchant houses such as Gibbs, who controlled the Antofagasta Nitrate and Railway Company, or companies registered in London, such as John Thomas's Liverpool Nitrate Company, bought machinery, built towns, recruited workers. They industrialised the desert, incorporated the dry, rocky, salty land into a world market, and turned land into capital. Now, Oficina Ramirez, which is an early acquisition by North, is an important example of the capitalisation of the Atacama Desert. In 1885, Robert Harvey, who's John Thomas's North's partner, presented a paper at the Institute of Civil Engineers in London entitled Machinery for the Manufacture of Nitrate Soda at the Ramirez Factory, Northern Chile. And Harvey introduced his subject. He says he's going to talk about the process of manufacturing nitrate of soda and the description of machinery at Oficina Ramirez, which is the largest establishment of its kind in the world, and it's the subject of his paper. I'm going to quote a little from his detailed engineering account. Essentially what he does is he provides details of the capitalisation of Ramirez and the industrialisation of the desert, with some attention to his role. So he says, in September 1882, the author received instructions from the directors of the Liverpool Nitrate Company Limited, who owned 6 square miles of nitrate grounds in the district of Ramirez in the province of Tarapacá, to prepare plans and estimate for the construction of an officina capable of producing from 6,000 to 6,500 tonnes of nitrate soda per month, this being 1,000 tonnes more than was the power of the largest officina then extant. So in January 1883, plans and specification were laid before the directors and approved, and the author was instructed to order the necessary machinery, some of which is set out in this machine drawing, which is a plan, and at the bottom is a section. So there's two views that he's offering you there. He orders 6 steel boilers, 30 feet long by 6 feet and 6 inches, double flues with 6 Galway tubes, and they're constructed by Messrs. Dalgleish and Company of St Helens. 12 boiling tanks with steel condensing tubes, 90 crystallising tanks, 2 feeding tanks, a 5-compartment washing tank, as well as 3 circular tanks, 25 feet in diameter by 12 feet high, and they come from the works of Messrs. Preston and Fawcett Company. Locomotives and rolling stock, a length of 29 miles of portable railway, as well as 2 semi-portable engines, and engines, pumps and machine tools by Messrs. Tanguy and Brothers. 3 crushing machines were made by Messrs. North, Humphrey and Dickinson of the Tarapacá foundry in Iquique. Now, with the exception of those 3 crushers, made in a workshop in the Chilean port of Iquique, but by a company that was owned at least in part by a British adventure capitalist, all the machinery was exported from Britain. Both the material forms and the systems of which they are component parts were planted to constitute an industrial colony. So landscape and the relationship to land is transformed through the imposition of industrial routines of work that are controlled, at least in part, by machinery. Now, by the mid-19th century, effects of mechanisation has been the subject of critical examination by Karl Marx, among others, And the argument is that machinery will intensify labour, speed labour, lengthen the labouring day, and importantly, that labour is characterised by a lack of formal and real control, and it's rendered contentless. So the relationship to the land is transformed by the imposition of machinery upon it. I want to talk a little about what that process is, so a little bit about the relationships that, and the routines, the relationships to land and the routines of work. In the mining and extraction of nitrate, explosions open up shallow beds, and these images are from the late 19th century from an album that's very central to our project, and it's of a mine called Alianza. But these are here just as illustrations of the process at the moment. So explosions open up shallow beds of caliche, which are loaded onto carts, which are pulled by mules, or in fact in Ramirez by the portable railway that have been imported from Britain. And they're transported to the works and tipped into the crushers. The crushed caliche that is then dissolved at very high temperatures, and the different densities of the liquid is run through a series of large tanks, those huge numbers of tanks that Harvey went to procure from English firms. So they run through a series of large tanks, and they allow sodium nitrate to be run off and separated from its residue. In Spanish, it's ripio. So nitrate was dried then and produced in a purified form. So these are the top where underneath is nitrate. That's, if you can see the kind of triangles that have been beginning to dry and become purified. Now, the system of tanks, so the industrial and chemical process that facilitated separation of nitrate from the desert, was adapted by the nitrate mining engineer called James Humberstone from what's called the Shanks system. The Shanks system acquired its name from James Shanks, who held an English patent for his amendments to what was known as the Leblanc process for producing soda. And although this is rather technical, it's actually quite important, is that the tanks you could explain as the ingenuity of individuals. So there's a nitrate engineer who's kind of worked and amended a process by a soda engineer, an English engineer who's amended a process by a French engineer. You could argue that it's just a transfer of technology through the ingenuity of individuals and the kind of giving at papers at the Institute of Civil Engineers. However, I would also argue that the system exists at the intersection of both of European political and economic formations. So the demand for soda, which the process derives from, increased with the industrialisation and the urbanisation of Europe. So soda is required for bleaching. These are textile economies of England and France. It's also required for the making of soap and for glass makers. So it's related to a process of the growth of cities. Nicolas Leblanc, with the support of the Duke of Orleans, patented the process for making artificial soda. It's a leaching process from a salt cake using charcoal and limestone. And he designed furnaces and built a factory at Saint-Denis that went into production in 1791. Now, the Duke of Orleans, despite renaming himself Philippe Gallaté, was guillotined in 1793. So Leblanc then surrendered his patents and his system, which meant that it was widely published throughout Europe and including adopted and used widely in the northwest of England, which is a textile producing area. Lancashire engineer James Shanks devised the adaption to the Leblanc process, which used different density of dissolved components and designed these false bottom tanks and outlet pipes. So what was allowed was to run off the separate mineral solutions by gravity. And he grouped his tanks or his vats in 4 to create a continuous cycle. So the residue in one tank could be lifted away while the process continues. So it allows for continuous and complete process of soda production. And that form is called lixiviation, was then applied to nitrates. So it's not simply that the Shanks system makes nitrate processing efficient, just as it had for soda. It created nitrate in an industrial and exportable form. So it's key to the production of nitrate as a commodity. That is, enables the production of nitrate in quantities for exchange. Now, one nitrate company would own several nitrate fields, nitrate officinas and warehouses in the port of Iquique, where sacks of nitrate were stored awaiting export to Liverpool, and then on to Germany. Now, German farmers who grew beet for cattle field liked the quickening effect of nitrate. As a fertiliser, it's a fast fertiliser, which seemed particularly important. Railways transported nitrate from the desert to the sea, and they're particularly key to profits and profiteering in nitrate. Railway companies charged nitrate companies for transportation, so monopolies reigned. High tariffs per quintal, so 100 weight of nitrate, were charged. And John Thomas North, ever on the lookout for opportunities to make fast money, he bought 7,000 shares in the nitrate railway companies, which was once owned by a Peruvian Montero brothers. And then the following year, he becomes company director. Henry Hucks Gibbs, so of the Gibbs House, complains to the Foreign Office that the monopoly of North of the nitrate railways was weighing unmercifully on British capital invested in nitrate works. So Gibbs objects to paying North's high tariffs, but more broadly to his parvenu status in the British nitrate trade. And their nitrate field of Aliantha, of which some of the images were shown, remained unworked until the railway company's monopoly was broken. So there's competition and monopolies between those who own the fields and those who own the railways. So shares, the overground, I suppose, the overground and above the desert, shares were bought and sold, prices rose and fell according to the productive capacity of the nitrate officinas and the value of exported nitrate, which was sold on the London stock market. Now, the Chilean government taxed exports of nitrate. So high production of nitrate delivering high volumes of export is in the Chilean national interest. The more nitrate accrued, the more tax revenue was acquired by the Chilean government. But high exports, large amounts of nitrate, lowered its price in world markets. So it's the interest in British and other foreign companies to restrict production, reduced exports and raised prices. So even at the time that Harvey's writing, although Ramirez is this huge, large factory, it's only working at half capacity in order to restrict production. So there are a successive combination of competing companies, and nitrate mining monopolies were established in order to regulate production. So overproduction becomes a problem for nitrate capitalists, but it's the source of income for Chile. So nation and market are fatally opposed. And in fact, market divided the nation. So the Chilean Congress, which was very friendly towards British interests, was divided against President Balmaceda, who wanted to moderate and regulate foreign interests. He talked, for example, of the Atacama Desert being a foreign factory. André Günther-Frank, who I mentioned earlier, he argued in the 1960s in a book that was reproduced into the 1970s rather, that the failure to reappropriate the nitrate fields to nationalise the desert meant, in his words, the economic surplus produced in Chile's nitrate mines were lost forever. So what is left in the landscape is a landscape of loss, of broken ground. These are Google images of nitrate mines taken just this morning in the Ramirez area. And so what you can see are the aerial views of slag heaps, the footprints of where the bateas, the vats would have been. And in this image, you can see the broken ground of the explosions, so the small-scale explosions. So what's left, then, is a landscape of loss. But these are not the only nitrate landscapes. The Gibbs family purchased Tintersfield in 1844. It was purchased with the profits of the guano trade, and its redesign in the high Gothic style was funded really by nitrate mining. Gothic, of course, is the architecture of Victorian morality, the value of work inscribed through the scrolls, the points, the arches, as a dutiful and even godly pursuit. And so there are a series of elisions in this now National Trust property and erasures in its forms. There's an elision between the sedentary and scheming work that constitutes stock market trading and banking and the skill of the pre-industrial craftsman. But both these forms of labour obscures absolutely the drudgery of nitrate mining. It is a substitute. Nitrate and its residue was shovelled away. Now, nitrate was shovelled into bags, lifted onto trains that make their way to the ports, and the waste is shovelled into carts, pulled away by mules and tipped into the slag heaps that we saw the aerial views in the Google Maps. Now, although nitrate officinas are built around small surface mines, the description of other forms of nitrate mining can apply to a great extent. An English historian describes mining as the raw material of industrialisation dug out of the earth by the muscles of men, aided only by pick and shovel. Now, nitrate workers were recruited to do this form of shoveling, this form of labouring, through an enganche system, and it was introduced onto the South American west coast through the construction of the Peruvian railways. And it's a very familiar system for the hiring of navvies and miners across Europe and North America. The enganche system recruited from areas some distance from the fields through which they would work. And you can see that the necessity of hiring workers, Chilean, Bolivian, Peruvians, from beyond the Atacama desert, so it's a place with no water, little water, and it could sustain few communities is fairly obvious. Nobody lives there, so you have to recruit people in. However, the dislocation of workers allowed for expedited their exploitation. Wages that compared favourably with local labouring were realised only in the company scrip, the filcher, which the currency of the nitrate towns. It becomes the only means through which to buy goods, including food, and it's the only means through which to sustain a working life in the desert. The price of company goods was high, and nitrate workers often ended up in debt to those to whom they worked. They worked as well day and night, so nitrate combinations, especially when they limited work, didn't limit hours, they just limited the amount of work. So miners might work 8 months out of 12 but would work when they worked in a shift system. Avery Hill, another nitrate landscape, is a North Kent estate that was purchased by John Thomas North in 1888. It's a very different form of nitrate landscape, both from the mines but also from that of Tintersfield, and it's a different style of capital accumulation. It was not merely a fashionable residence, I'd argue, actually, but part of North's business identity as a nitrate capitalist. It's a display of wealth, of the success of speculation. John Thomas North was actually subject to quite a lot of criticism in the British economic press for his style of business practice. His companies were overvalued, his share prices were inflated, but Avery Hill was the manifestation of both his flair and his luck, a form of Tory populism. He was a gambler, he was a generous man, he was a partygoer. So each of the forms of the house, which included Turkish baths and a conservatory that became a Winter Gardens, and Winter Gardens, as I'm sure you know, is forever an imperial form. They demonstrated really the material culture of nitrate. So the commodity itself, nitrate as a mineral, as well as shares, profit and personal fortune, has left the most profound traces on a European landscape. Nitrate is terrible stuff, and I mean that in the word terrible is I've thought about a lot in order to use it. Its export as a fertiliser consolidated the patterns of Western industrial farming, what's now recognised as an unsustainable agrochemical industry that has transformed the landscape into a moment of supply in a food chain. It's altered the structure of soils, it's polluted the rivers and seas. But the effects of these are now the subject of quite intense debate in the late 20th century and into the 21st, but they're preceded by the effects of nitrate as an explosive in the century's early years. In 1914, according to the historian of dynamite, Stephen Bauer, he writes, Chilean nitrates were more valuable than ever before as a crucial ingredient of all armaments, from smokeless powder in cannons and rifles to mortars, mines, and other explosives. Those people who've read All Quiet on the Western Front would know the effect of English mines upon German soldiers. So English mines and shells were filled with Chilean nitrates, and the export to German farmers ceased at the outcome of the war, which led to the increased industrial development of experiments that occurred in order to fix nitrogen. So the Haber-Bosch process, which is now the dominant means through which fertiliser is produced now. So the landscapes of the Western Front, of which this is an image, is very much echoes the broken landscapes of the Chilean desert. And I'd like to finish there and then introduce Ignacio, who's going to show some images of contemporary Chilean landscapes to see alternative forms of the kinds of legacies that are left.